Native American Children, Acknowledgment and Inclusion, Bridging the Past and Today. Cultural Acknowledgement. My name is Gould Jacinto. I am the president and CEO of the Native American Advancement Corporation in Bridgeton, New Jersey. I am a visionary entrepreneur in the financial services industry who is passionate about financial literacy through education. I offer my services to all, regardless of income or social status. My focus is to reach and educate families, individuals, and businesses. I also coach and mentor future entrepreneurs to develop their own companies to create a legacy. This session aims to bridge the past and today firsthand by acknowledging, including, and explaining that Indigenous children are still a part of our world. We are a part of a community that has remained continuous from its European inception. In the 2020 census, New Jersey has counted 6% American Indians, and the chances are that some of the students in your schools may be Indigenous. This acknowledgement will be the beginning of breaking down barriers and the incorrect thinking that we are history. We are alive in a community that is no longer hiding. Additionally, this will create empathy, which will bring awareness to activities that may be offensive to our culture of people. Brief history, Native residential schools. As I prepare this session for you today, more horrible discoveries just took place. I am not sure if any of you are aware. However, over 1,500 Native children's bodies have been discovered on only 15 of the 507 official residential schools, with more unofficial residential schools to locate. These schools began in the 1870s, and the last school finally closed in 1996. It was reported that up to 10,000 children were reported missing throughout this period. Why? Why was there a need for a residential school, you ask? Well, this quote from 1875 by Bishop Grandin explained it in one sentence. We instill in them a pronounced distaste for the native life, so that they will be humiliated when reminded of their origin. When they graduate from our institutions, the children have lost everything native except their blood. Erase? There is no way to erase a culture by a centralized formal school education. The purpose of a formal education is a knowledge source to enhance students' skills, methods, to capitalize and motivate their curiosity, to improve their wellness and understand how their environment works. Nowhere does a formal education give the right to annihilate a child from their origin inhumanely. Yet this practice continued through the 1990s. With this brief history, we can now attempt to understand the significance of this session. Identification methods, attempt at annihilation. There is an official federal government method from 1934 of identification for the Native population that is indescribably and culturally disgraceful. The process of blood quantum in identifying culture is, for lack of better terms, insane. Only one other time. This practice was only in place one other time for a human population, and that was the racial policy of Nazi Germany. This practice was a set of policies and laws implemented in 1933 to 45 based on a specific racist doctrine, believing that superiority of the Aryan race, which claimed scientific legitimacy. Main attempt at annihilation. This was combined with a genetic program that aimed for racial hygiene by sterilization and extermination of those they saw as subhumans, culminating in the Holocaust. The only other practice in our history is identifying various breeds of dogs, cats, and other animals. Identifying Native people in this policy is the main attempt of annihilation by diminishing the so-called blood quantum of what is determined to be a subhuman people. We cannot erase this, along with residential school, medical practices that resulted in sterilization and ongoing trafficking of young Native girls and women, are the culminating factor that brings us here today. It is no mistake that the disparities of Native people are finally in the attention of the world. It was only a matter of time, which proves the point. We cannot erase a culture with assimilation and humiliation. We are matrilineal. Many Native American tribes are matrilineal instead of patrilineal societies that you see from Europe. This lineage means that you are descended from your mother's clan, not your father's. It also means the women are instrumental in decision-making process for the entire process of the tribe. Well-known matrilineal societies include Lenape, as well as Hopi and Iroquois. Native American tribes do not formally use blood quantum and still do not recognize this practice. Instead, we determine tribal status based on kinship, lineage, and family ties. We are increasing. The National Research Council mentioned that in 1996, the U.S. Census indicates the American Indian population grew for the United States and has been nearly continuously grown since 1900 to over 1.42 million by the year 1980 and over 1.9 million persons by 1990. In the 2000 census, there are over 2.5 million Native Americans. In the 2010, there are 2.9 million and estimated to be 6.9 million in 2020. It further states that since 1960, people may self-identify their ancestry on the U.S. Census. Native American activism and demand for justice in Native American history have resulted in more individuals identifying as having Native American ancestry on the census. We are increasing, and as a culture that has remained resilient despite the various attempts of annihilation. My grandmother. Example, my grandmother on my mother's side, born in 1908, told me that when she was a child, she could only talk about being Lenape in the home and was never allowed to speak of it in public. You see, we were not citizens of the United States until the passage of the act on June 2nd, 1924. This non-citizenship meant that if you acknowledged your culture, you were relocated to one of the federally approved territories and could no longer own land according to the Indian Removal Act. 1920 census. I remember hearing her speak about her grandparents acknowledging themselves and others on the 1920 census and how this was considered rebellious by others in the community. Others were worried about the family's welfare and were humiliated due to society and church teaching. Needless to say, after many years of searching, I was able to find the census records heard in the stories. This is an actual picture of the 1920 census showing my great-great-grandparents. Breaking hidden barriers. With this brief introduction in history, we can safely say that there are Native children in our schools. It is not our duty or responsibility to determine who and how much blood. However, it is our responsibility to recognize that some practices could damage the children we educate. This picture is of my daughter on a horse at one of our tribal gatherings. School example. Tribal member, female, early 1980s, elementary classroom acknowledgement and teacher response. During the elementary school lesson, the teacher exclaimed that there were no more Lenape Indians and all were relocated west. The child in this class raised her hand, stood up, and stated that she was Lenape. The teacher's response to this child was, "Sit down, you are not Native or Lenape, and there are none in this area." This disregard of culture caused an outcry from her immediate family. However, this was a significant issue for the entire tribe. There was not only emotional damage and humiliation, however, there were strict consequences that befell this teacher and the whole school district. It just so happens that this child was a part of the second generation, raised not to be humiliated about her heritage. This practice only began in the late 1960s with the ongoing protest for the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 that finally established our rights so that we could exercise our traditional religion. The community at large lagged far behind the teachings of the Native family. This picture is of myself and my youngest child in his preschool class in a speech about our people. Your grandmother may be Native. Here are some ways to quickly break down the barriers. Open the door for dialogue. Ask each new class how many children are Native American or parents acknowledge some Native American ancestry. Then ask what tribe or state, and what does your family call you? This practice should be done at the onset of the teaching year, especially avoiding the holidays associated with Native Americans. For example, Columbus and Thanksgiving. Embrace what the child is saying without prejudice or doubt. And remember, we are matrilineal. The child's grandmother may be Native. Proper description of Native children. We describe Indigenous in America as relics of the past, subhuman to European settlement, and tragic subjects that were all removed. We romanticize stories and instill stereotypes talking about Indigenous and describing our history and cultures with words like Indians, tribes, bands, savages, wilderness, hunters, nomads, massacres, scalping, war party, chief as a nickname, Pocahontas as a nickname, and squaw. This use of such terms is not only incredibly uncomfortable for Native students, but is incredibly offensive. Furthermore, using these words continue to place Native Americans as some sort of sideshow to American history. Consequently, many non-Native students and educators still find the Indigenous as artifacts from a time past. Some see Indigenous as poverty-stricken populations who were forgotten on reservations. We Indigenous have continued cultural, religious, and economic practices as survival. These words devalue the Indigenous struggle, who constantly try this day to work with colonialism. Appropriateness. American Indian and Indian are not appropriate names to describe a people or culture within a tribal base. Usage of the name of the tribe is essential. Use Indigenous when describing a group. Find out what people live in the area and make a reasonable attempt at pronouncing the proper name. Nanticoke Lenape people use nicknames for each person and a child, and seldom use their surnames and titles. Some nicknames are Indigenous inspired and some can be phonetically different and based on the personality, looks, or habits. Embrace a parental nickname of a child when in a small group setting. How Indigenous children learn best. I am aware that this session is not on the learning style of the Indigenous child. However, this brief description may offer you insight. Learning is based on the usefulness of the object, not just the nomenclature of the thing. Education is in whole and seldom in part. Indigenous people are highly empathetic with nature and animals and susceptible to the emotions of authority. Indigenous people are timid and do well in small group settings with close friends. Indigenous people are auditory learners and are distracted by visual stimulation. Indigenous children and adults will tend not to be attentive. However, they will dream, visualize, and analyze lessons as they are taught and learn what is being said. Indigenous people in general are great storytellers, and imagination can be amusing. The storytelling talent should be emphasized and can be an excellent foundation for learning. Importance of art the Indigenous way. We are ready to dive into the deep thoughts of Indigenous arts. I will share some of my art and talents with you to better understand the platform on which I stand. Many thousands of years are Lenape arts created. They are rooted in tradition, but also inspired by individual imagination and skill. Art made from nature evolved with the advancements of technology and changes in culture. However, creations have remained a unique process. The design of my Lenape art is from the heart and mindset that forms from deep within. Each piece I create represents the creator. Understanding the gifts of the creator and what is available to me is one with nature. I am inspired to create from the gifts of Mother Earth. I feel as though I have the talent to create as it speaks to me. When someone asks me for someone to be made, this may take more time because the asking person is considered one with me and the art. The creation takes on the form that represents the asking and me together as one with nature. My creations take time, it takes thought, and it takes meditation. It takes a purpose as to why the inspiration has become the creation. As a mother of 5 children and 2 grandchildren, I am eager to pass on Lenape traditions to further future generations. If we do not persevere, these arts will not continue to be passed down. Over the years, I participated in various educational programs featuring Lenape traditional arts. I also published a series of children's books to pass on the stories of the tribe to their young. I created video materials aimed at a deeper understanding of Lenape culture and artistic expressions. How to introduce art through a lens of culturally responsive instruction. The creation. We have a firm foundation in the lens of an Indigenous child. With this knowledge, we can have a creative discussion on culturally responsive art instruction. My first suggestion is to have Indigenous art lessons apart from social holidays that involve Indigenous people as an artifact of the time past. Several examples of art can be taught to students that would celebrate Indigenous people and bridge the gap between history and today. Remember, we are taught to be one with nature, and using natural resources is the main lesson. Some art forms can be clay. This lesson can be directly related to the ancient art of vessels made of natural gray clay. Pine needle weaving. This is taught to children at a very early age, and the agility level crosses many generations. Birch bark art. White birch is used as clothing adornment and hair art. Gourd art. Gourds can be made into numerous art objects. Beadwork. Although beads originated in the Orient, indigenous people have adopted this form of art. Shell art. There are many resources for shells, and the art that can be created from them can be quite beautiful. Cornhusk dolls. There are so many creative ways to make items and adornments from the corn husk. And creative stories about nature. These are some samples of Lenape clay art. The first picture is a vessel that was discovered that is very old, Eastern woodland. And then the next two pictures are modern day projects to show what we can do with clay art. Pine needle weaving. Of course, we still have the long leaf pine trees, and this can be done as a whole classroom project to show that we can make baskets from the pine needles. Birch bark art. Birch bark art has been done for many years as a classroom teaching. And birch bark is readily available and can be made into different objects. The top is a basket that was made from birch bark simply by using sinew, a hole puncher in birch bark, and the bottom is a piece of a mobile that was made of birch bark and decorated with a simple pen. Lenape gourd art. Gourds are also readily available, and there's many projects that can be made with the gourds, including rattles and pieces to make into hair adornments and mantelpieces. Of course, everybody's familiar with bead art. There are various different styles and different patterns. They sell looms that can be loom kits, and then there's hand stitching kits that can be taught to children in the classroom. And then there's Lenape shell art. There's shells that they're sold in the craft stores that we can make into objects. The first one is a necklace made out of a scallop shell, and the second one is a pouch. And the projects don't have to be this elaborate, but the idea will be to make shell art for the children out of natural resources. And of course, one of the most famous of the Lenape art is the corn husk art. And corn husk, there's corn husk in all the craft stores, and there's many different ways, and there's also lessons that can be taught and that are readily available. But this bridges this gives the student a more profound understanding that these types of arts are more indigenous and more and represent our people more than some of the flat art that we do around the holidays. And then creative story writing. This is a couple of pages out of one of my books, The Wishing Doll. But all children have a creative story process thinking, and to have their stories and possibly self-publish a book. I know there's a couple of publishing companies that work directly with schools to have their stories written, and it doesn't necessarily need to be Native inspired, but it could also draw out the fact that Native Americans love to tell stories and creative stories, but so do other cultures. So this can bridge the cultural divide by stating that, all cultures tell stories. Samples of what not to do. Now, this is really important. These are some of the samples of some art that is very famous, even as a child, as I was a child, and and my grandchildren that are in school today. This is someone's drawing of what they depict of what could have been and how they could have looked in 1491. Yes, it's a very nice drawing. However, it really doesn't do any justice to Lenape people at the time of this Columbus discovery. This is making children's outfits out of paper bags with headdresses. And of course, we have the famous Happy Thanksgiving cutouts or things that we put on the window. And the famous headdresses, again, made out of paper. I see native people made out of the impressions of a hand. A native person holding corn, no idea what that is. And I can't wait to eat because, or I am thankful for, on Native American children is just disgraceful. And here's another sample of, I guess would be your handprint with your fingers. They even sell it, graphics and patterns and PNG clip art that you can download. The famous feather turkey headband. And the biggest issue of today, the Boy Scouts, the Order of the Arrow. Is it okay for children to pretend to be Native when it was not okay for Native children to be Native? Now I'm just going to go into some of my work that I do. I developed a series of books so that we can keep our stories alive. Of course, all these stories were made up by me, but I'm not the original storyteller of our tribe. But this is the Cohansik Lenape Village Tales book series, Old Stories, New History. And then with these books, I offer imagination that brings the past to life. I wrote Seek the Better Place to add to the Tale of the Turkey's Detailed Tale, The Creator's Great Soup, The Blossoms of Bright Flower, and The Wishing Doll, Whisper Wind Song, and The Way to Riches is What You Think, to include our people in the history of books. Like all others, sharing stories with my children and grandchildren and future generations is a part of my legacy. Often, we natives are portrayed as something that's from the past when we are alive and thriving. There are many underrepresented artists or never mentioned in mainstream media. We are aware, and it is evident, that we are significantly underrepresented in movies, commercials, and television, and primarily as a subject of books. Many artists should be acknowledged and encouraged to publish their stories. I have decided to publish this book series for my children and grandchildren so they could have these stories from me in their hearts and to be able to pass this down like any other books that they love. I am incredibly excited that I can join such a small group of talented Native American authors. It took much courage for me to put my stories in print, but I did it. And we must encourage others as well to tell their stories and to give them access to be able to publish their books. And it is an honor to be able to share my books. If we do not share it with you, then you will not remember us. This is the Lenape no-face ancestor gourd art. And considering all that I create, I think that my no-face ancestor Lenape gourd art may be the dearest to me. This gourd art is a creation from my heart that was inspired after many years of meditation. Gourds take many years before they can be created into another form. From the time that I hold the seed in my hand and place it in the fertile soil, and as I watch it grow and take shape, there are times that I stare at the art, at the form that it takes, and it speaks to me and tells me what it should be. The gourd's seed carries my ancestors, and it brings the past, and then it continues to give life. It provides beauty, and it is a gift. Each seed has the mark of its ancestor, and each gourd influences the past. I think of my ancestors as I plant the seed in this fertile soil, and I give thanks that I can be a part of a long creation process. There are times when I hold a gourd in my hands for many hours before it speaks to me and decides what it should be. Sometimes I can turn it into a vessel or a rattle, but other times when I hold the gourds, they inspire me to become a Lenape no-face ancestor. This art is a long tradition among the Lenape. Whenever we create our likeness of any living creature, past or present, we never put a face on it. We do not believe that it is our place to make any likeness of any face or any creature. Only the Creator has the privilege of doing so. The no-face ancestor art helps me keep this tradition alive. However, it also provides me with a unique opportunity to explore my artistic ideas about translating its message into my artwork. I create something different without losing its importance to me, my people, and everyone who communicates with it. The Infinity Spiral Pine Needle Art. Pine Needle art is another favorite of mine. I feel as though I can take what the tree has given me and has let go after it shades and houses the birds and other animals where other animals live. My Lenape Infinity Spiral Pine Needle creations are from a long needles that fall into the ground to create baskets, hair pieces, and ornament for my regalia as a work of art. It is such a simple process, and yet it creates a beautiful spiral that can be inspired to take many forms and uses. The trees carry my ancestors through their leaves. The tree is a gift that continues from our past. The Lenape Infinity Spiral Pine Needle art reminds us that we continue to grow and expand and are a part of history and contribute to the future. Indigenous medicine flower oil. I created Indigenous medicine flower oil as a direct result of my personal needs. I'm allergic to chemicals, including mineral oil, coconut, and parabens. The art in creating this formula resulted from many hours of studying the effects of different chemicals on the skin. The only way around this dilemma was to develop and perfect my art. This product is now widespread and sales are prosperous. Adding Indigenous medicine flower oil to your health routine may provide immense benefits to your skin, hair, and nails. Here are some of the Indigenous medicine flower oil benefits that you may find surprising. The oil is excellent for the skin. It promotes the regeneration of healthy skin cells, and it's a great oil to use for scarring, cuts, stretch marks, pock marks, and some moles. And it's also used as an anti-aging oil to reduce wrinkles, and it slows the signs of aging. The Indigenous medicine flower tea. I created this tea blend especially for my grandmother. Strong medicine Marion Strong Medicine Gould as she aged. My grandmother taught me the art of herbal healing. Her artistic teachings of healing with plants is the way we remain one with nature. The herb tea gives your body the building blocks it needs to maintain tissues and hormones necessary for good health. If you drink this tea every day, you can make a significant change in your mood, your skin, your well-being, and your energy. Passed from generation to generation, the wealth of information about the healing powers of this herbal blend for our physical, mental, and emotional, social, and spiritual selves continues to hold today. For centuries, the indigenous people right here on the northeast coast of America have used herbs and spices to enhance the taste of food and drink and help heal their bodies. Thank you.